The whips have agreed that item 16, the motion on homelessness, will be considered next. I now call on Councillor Hogg to formally move and Councillor McKinney to second the motion.
Formally moved.
Can I have the seconder? Thank you. There is an amendment to the motion that has been circulated. May I ask Councillors Ellis and Mrs. Jane Cooper to formally move and second their amendment?
I move the amendment, Mr. Mayor.
Formally second.
Thank you. I now invite Councillor Efson to introduce the motion. Thank you very much indeed. I understand it to be your maiden speech, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors. I hope you can all hear me. Right. In the ward, I'm a councillor, we have created history due to the legacy of Mr. Jacob Efson, Mr. Tony Belton and Bert for their very hard work of campaigning in the past. The residents, similar to Bedford Ward, are happy because it is 3 women. We are also representing a community and being commended by the ethnicity. There has not been a Labour BAME councillor since 1986, but however, we don't just have one BAME, we have 2. And that's why we are the Queens of Queenstown. You could say we are moving towards a stronger and better Wandsworth. Homelessness has increased 2013 to 2014 in Wandsworth. In Wandsworth, 1,123 households considering to be homeless. I know in my ward there are hidden homelessness. For example, a young girl revising for GCSEs in a communal corridor because her home does not have room for her to study. A mother trying to put her baby to sleep in a pushchair, walking up and down the communal corridor. A mum lives in one room and her son is living with her because he has divorced his wife and cannot afford housing. 2 families living together because one mum has just left domestic violence. Several hundred families on housing estate are in emergency accommodation on the estates. A father described to me when he came to Battersea with his young family, he's been waiting for over 10 years for a transfer. He quotes, "I was looking forward for my children getting older and being employed, and now," he said with a deep sigh, "my children cannot move out because there is not enough affordable housing." A young person living out of a rucksack on a friend's sofa does not have any privacy. 147 separate families were staying at bed and breakfast for 11 weeks, when the maximum is supposed to be 6. Also, the capping of housing benefit, the average tenant is losing £25 per week. The stress of the homelessness contribute to bad health and emotional worries. Thank you for listening.
Councillor Ellis, not a maiden speech, I suspect.
Not indeed even a maiden, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, first of all, I'd like to congratulate Councillor Efson on her maiden speech. She spoke extraordinarily eloquently and from the heart, and I suspect she's rather glad it's all over as well. So, congratulations to you. Councillor Efson did illustrate some of the stories that are out there, and indeed, they are distressing. But I think we do have to understand that homelessness, increased homelessness, is of course a London-wide problem. This morning I looked at the shelter website, and I was surprised to discover that in most areas of the country, between sort of 11, 12 and 12, 13, the homelessness figures had either declined, or if they had increased, it was in single figures, the highest single figure being 8% in the southeast, until you get to London where it was 19%. And of course, from looking at local authority websites and Department of Communities and Local Government website, the bulk of those increases are in inner London boroughs. Now, working on the assumption that not all the inner London boroughs are failing, as Wandsworth apparently is, I think there probably are other reasons why these homelessness figures are as large as they are. The first reason I assume it could be would be because of the increase in population that has occurred. In the 2001 census, London had a population of 7.3 million, but by 2011 it was 8.2 million, and it's very probably larger than that now. London is currently the third largest city in Europe after Moscow and Istanbul, and I suppose it's a matter of opinion whether Istanbul is actually a European or an Asian city. The bulk of the growth in inner London is a similar measure, and for instance Wandsworth in 2001 the population was 260,000, and 2011 it was 307,000. Now clearly the amount of available land to build housing on has not increased in proportion to the population, and this partially explains why there is a shortage. There is a further reason that I would surmise has caused this, and that is the very severe recession that we have had and are just fortunately coming out of. And for those people who were anything at all to do with the building industry from 2008 onwards, they will know that the availability of building companies, or indeed anybody else for that matter, to get funds from banks was almost nil, and the amount of building work that was going on everywhere was almost nil. So clearly those, I think, are two reasons why we are in the situation we are in. However, members opposite, I know, will be delighted to know that even during the recession in Wandsworth, 1,000 affordable homes were built over that time, I think larger than in most other areas of London. This is a matter that the opposition have been raising quite a lot over the last year or so, and quite rightly so. And so I thought it might be interesting to see what they had to say about it in their local election manifesto. So I had a look. And I'll tell you what it said about homelessness and what the Labour Party intended to do about it. Absolutely nothing. I find it frankly astonishing that a matter for which they claim to care so deeply did not even warrant a section in their manifesto. I then took a look at the Independent Commission report. This was something that was widely tipped to be the new way of doing things, and I had a look to see what they had to say about it. They mentioned it twice. They noted rising levels of homelessness as a key risk, and in fact they were so proud of that phrase it got raised again repeatedly in exactly the same words 2 pages later. There was absolutely no suggestion about how to overcome this problem, other than to say that the next Labour Council would be building 1,000 affordable homes over 4 years. I'm pleased to say that we will be delivering 1,200 affordable homes over the next 3 years. So, Mr. Mayor, the problem that we have here is either we do what the Labour Party are asking for, and that's to set targets. That'll solve it. Rewrite the report. That's another good one. Or alternatively, Mr. Mayor, I think the best option we can do is to just get on, start providing the new housing, and I know the other speakers from my group will be saying just how we're going to do that. Thank you.
Councillor McKinney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to begin by just thanking the officers in the community development and the housing departments for all their sterling work they're doing on the regeneration in Roehampton. The regeneration in Roehampton we are looking forward to it with great excitement. Some of the elderly are not so excited, and they have lovely replies like, well, I'll be dead before it happens anyway, so it doesn't matter to me. So I think they will start to get excited as soon as things start to happen from 2017. So we are looking forward to the regeneration. Now I'd like to talk about homelessness, and then I'd like to talk about bed and breakfast, and then I'd like to bring it all together as the kind of, in a sense, answer to Councillor Ellis and use some of Councillor Efsom's work that she brought in. The homelessness, as we've all seen, is dreadful. It's apparently the figures are coming up in March 2015 for 916 families, all who will be made homeless. And the reasons being are because of the private rental sector plays a huge, they are playing the biggest part of this homelessness. And I happen to have a Citizens Advice Bureau report dated Monday, July 2014, which is Monday. And can I just read a couple of sentences from it, just to show exactly what they are finding that people are coming to them about homelessness. It's slightly different to Councillor Ellis, but it has some other reasons in there. Growing numbers of private sector tenants are turning to, can I say cab for now, after facing eviction, despite being up to date with their rent. And also people come to the Bureau for help with more than 5,000 issues caused by the problem in 2013 of homelessness. That's 5,000 up from 3,700 the previous year. So more and more people are coming, and the reasons they're coming to CAB are because the landlord wants to sell their house. The rents are expensive, the housing market has gone up, they want to sell their house. Rents are hiked to unaffordable levels, and so our poor tenants, our poor residents and our wards can't afford them. Or they've simply asked the landlord to carry out some repairs, and they're out. So homelessness is a big problem, and the private rental sector is the biggest reason for many of the homelessness. So I'd like to leave that as point one. And point two, I'd like to bring in the bed and breakfast figures. And thank you, Councillor Epston, for bringing in the figure of the 11 weeks, because it was 11 weeks, which has then changed, amended to 10 weeks. But 11 weeks for bed and breakfast, can I just put this forward to you, is one term. It's nearly a whole term of a child's school life, of the year school. So they have lost out, they are feeling insecure, they're in bed and breakfast, they've probably gone to a new school where they don't know anybody, they're feeling insecure, they're not sure what's happening, their head is full of all this. How can they learn? There's no room in their heads to learn anything. So that third of a year is basically there's little learning going on. So that child's life is marked from then on. So bed and breakfast is not the answer either. So what I'd like to conclude with, I'm going to just conclude on one point, is to say that the total benefit cap, which is applied nationally, I would say it needs to be changed. And I know that you have been handed this from above, but I can understand. I would like to see the residents of my ward treated fairly, as I'm sure everybody in this room would like to see. And so my challenge to you, is what I'm going to finish with, is can you please ask your coalition to differentiate the total benefit cap so that where places like Wandsworth have extremely high rents, landlords, we need to have higher total benefit cap in Wandsworth than other places where the rent is lower, to encourage these private rental sector to take back people, to put people in their homes so we have less homelessness. Thank you.
Councillor Jane Cooper.
Good evening, Mr Mayor. I would also like to thank Councillor McKinney for her maiden speech and to say I'm looking forward to working with her in Roehampton, and we have been working recently, haven't we? I'm sure that I speak for all members of the Council when I say that our duties towards the homeless are some of the most important that the Council has. And I thank Councillor Hodgson McKinney for raising this subject, even though it was discussed at length only 2 weeks ago on the 2nd of July, when paper 317 was debated at the Housing Overview and Scrutiny Committee. In that paper, a wealth of information is provided about homelessness trends and issues, and it is, I think, fair to say that the motion before the Council tonight is at best naive, as it selectively quotes some facts and figures whilst ignoring others. For example, this motion ignores the wider context sent out in paragraph 49 to 52, which showed that from April to December 2013, numbers in temporary accommodation last year rose across London by 9%. Numbers in temporary accommodation increased in 24 of the 32 London inner boroughs. But this council compared favourably with other London boroughs, having the third lowest level of temporary accommodation use amongst inner London boroughs. The report also highlights several other very relevant points, which Councillor Hoggs and McKinney have apparently chosen to ignore. Paragraph 40 states that the average time spent in temporary accommodation for those rehoused in the year was 6.33 months, which was the same as in 2012-13. Further, the average time for all households who left temporary accommodation, rehoused or otherwise during the year was slightly lower, at 5.66 months. Paragraph 41 clearly states that these results compare very favourably with results seen from the previous year, and the face of rising homelessness during the year to maintain the average period spent in temporary accommodation is encouraging and indicative of the earlier making of and faster rate of offers made following acceptance of that duty. This motion also ignores the responsibility of Councillor Hoggs McKinney's own party for creating the conditions which have led to the current increases in homelessness. I refer to the admission by Clive Betts MP, the Labour chair of the Communities and Local Government Select Committee, that while in government, he says his party did not build enough houses, which is why, since 2010, this government has invested over £1 billion to tackle homelessness and supporting vulnerable households. Last year, the number of UK households found to be homeless but not in priority need was less than a third of the 2003 peak of over 67,000 under the last Labour government. And on an even more positive note, levels of homeless acceptance in England have reduced by 7% in the last quarter compared to the same period last year. This is also 65% lower than the peak reached under the last Labour government in 2003. However, this does not mean that we are complacent about these issues, and various recommendations were approved by the Executive last week to better deal with some of the challenges facing the Council at present. These include spending £5 million from the HRA reserves to provide good quality temporary accommodation for larger homeless families as an alternative to B&B. Changing the allocation scheme, subject to consultation now underway, to try and speed up the rate at which households in temporary accommodation with one child under 3 years are rehoused, which will provide a measure of parity with existing overcrowded tenants with the same family size. I recall Councillor Hogg and McKinney supporting both of these recommendations during the debate on the 2nd. Moreover, whilst of course we'd all like to see homeless and temporary accommodation reduced, and indeed this Council has a proud record of doing so when conditions allow, we can only deal with these things as they are, and must not forget that as important as our duties to the homeless are, they are not our only priority. Councillor Hoggs McKinney will accept that perhaps the most immediate way of reducing temporary accommodation is to rehouse more households than are admitted. The paper proposed an increase in numbers rehoused off the homeless queues this year, but to go further would mean less furthers, including the overcrowded, the disabled, those occupying larger homes and so on. I hope that this is not what they are advocating, and as such, I would urge members to accept our amendment and oppose their motion. Thank you.
Councillor Cough.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And it's always very nice to hear new voices on the Council, and I look forward to hearing a few more later on tonight. I think I'm not going to get into the statistics. There's been a lot of statistics thrown around, and frankly, I find them a bit boring. I would like to say, though, that I think one thing we can all agree on is that successive governments have completely failed to build enough houses in this country. Labour, Conservative, you name it, they haven't delivered. And I think we can all agree that we need to build more homes. We need to build more homes in areas where there's good transport. And frankly, the baton also needs to be carried by parts of the southeast and the commuter belt where there's plenty of space and, you know, not risking to upset. Well, I don't think it will because no one lives in the green belt here. We're all urban councillors. But obviously, you know, the green belt is a sacred cow in this country, and I think that has to change. The thing about Wandsworth is it's a very popular place to live. It's a very successful borough, partly because of the council, partly because of the local environment that we have here. And as a result of that, there's an enormous demand for homes, housing, and I think we all agree that the homeless situation is of great concern. And so we all recognise that, as Councillor Ellis has referenced, it's a London-wide problem. Where I disagree with the Labour narrative is that it's partly because of the way Wandsworth Council has acted, and that we sit on our hands and let this go on without any policies or any initiatives or any solutions. Let's be clear here. There are a number of initiatives that we're undertaking. We've put £6 million into infill sites in our estates to deliver more homes. We've put £5 million into temporary accommodation to buy up more family housing. We are pioneering the regeneration of 2 very large estates, and we would like to go further and quicker, but of course we need to govern by the consent of our local residents, and we need to make sure that they are fully consulted. And then finally, of course, we are very successful with our planning approach. We are open to engagement, and we've delivered over 1,000 units of affordable homes in the planning system last year. That's #1 in London, and I think is a very important statistic. So we are trying to deliver homes here. I think my point with the Labour narrative on this is that it's big on criticism, but it's not very robust on solutions. I mean, the housing benefit point, that's something that's beyond our control as councillors. What I'm quite interested in to know is what would Labour do if they were in administration? What would they do to improve the situation, how they can match what we are trying to achieve? And I think it boils down to 2 things that they would do. The first is they would probably intervene more. Now, we know they like to intervene because they constantly intervened on the planning committee to refuse planning applications that generated housing, employment, jobs, opportunities. I can't think of many times with the major applications in the last 4 years where they were on the side of the approving. Think about the Clapham Junction Peabody estate, often affectionately referred to as Mordor, and I think a great result for Wandsworth, seeing that redeveloped with 50% affordable housing and decent homes. Of course, they were against that, and we know from other boroughs where they are in administration, and we look at other boroughs where they are in administration, where they do like to intervene, such as Islington, and of course they didn't get any affordable housing in the planning pipeline last year. So you've got to get the balance right. The other thing they'd like to do, I suspect, is spend a lot more money. And we are spending money ourselves, as we all know, on our regeneration schemes. But I get the feeling that they would like to go out and they'd like to buy lots of large, expensive family houses in this borough, which would be an exorbitant cost and a questionable use of public money, and something which I suspect they would be punished on the doorstep from the public's point of view, and would probably increase their tenure outside office for another 30 years to go along with the 30 years plus that they've got at the moment. So I think we've heard a lot tonight about big thinking from Councillor Osborne and his team, and I would like to pass the baton on to Councillor Hogg. I would like to hear his big thinking and some big solutions, because at the moment I'm hearing lots of criticism, lots of statistics, but not really any solutions from your side about how you actually plan to resolve this very, very important issue.
Councillor Hogg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Wandsworth faces a homelessness crisis. It is serious and it is growing. Last year, 613 households were in council temporary accommodation. That had risen to 791 at the start of this year. And even with the measures that Councillor Cuff, Councillor Cooper have outlined, the welcome measures, it's predicted to go above 900 by the end of the year. I want to discuss the causes of this crisis, what impact it's had on local families, and what we can do to get it under control. The main cause of the homeless crisis is people not being able to pay their rent. End of a private tenancy led to 13% of homeless cases in 2001, but this had risen to 53%, a majority, by last year. In this week's Wandsworth Guardian, a Battersea mother tells about her and how her and her boy became homeless when their landlord increased the rent from £250 a week to £450 a week. Completely unsustainable. And these rocketing local rents are hitting families that are already squeezed by pay freezes and benefit cuts. It just takes, a job loss, a relationship breakup to then send you into that spiral of debt, and you're trapped. We see more and more of our homeless families are housed in temporary accommodation, in particular bed and breakfast. The legal maximum for a family in bed and breakfast is 6 weeks. As we know, Wandsworth kept 147 separate families last year for longer than that period. And this lack of decent accommodation is actually deterring people from seeking help. A woman rang me this week to say she's actually reluctant to leave the home she's currently in, where she's at risk of domestic violence, because the council's offer was for out-of-borough bed and breakfast accommodation. She believed that was completely unsuitable for her autistic son. If this council invested in appropriate temporary accommodation, she would not be in that dilemma. It's wrong. So what should we do? I think the question at the heart of this debate is, what level of homelessness are we willing to tolerate? As I say, even with the useful package of measures we put forward, which are affordable, which are sensible, we're looking at 900. Is 1,000 too many? Councillor Efson and Councillor McKinney have been excellent at sketching out the human detail behind this. I have to disappoint Councillor Cuff. I can only do it in statistics. And one statistic that wasn't in any of the papers is that tonight there are 1,469 children homeless in Wandsworth. Can they emerge from this without any sort of scars at all? And just to be absolutely clear, the council's current plan for next year is to increase that number. That's what we're budgeting for. That's our plan. So how much will you tolerate? What value, financial and social, do you put on a family losing their home? And at what stage do we judge on outcomes? We turn around to officers and say, your job is to take robust action to reverse this crisis, not just to manage it. If that's a chasing targets culture, it's one that I'm in favour of. Labour has looked for pragmatic solutions throughout this crisis. Sometimes it is appropriate to rehouse families into the private sector, and sometimes because of costs, those homes won't be in the borough. I don't pretend this is a Wandsworth problem. It is London-wide, as Councillor Ellis has said. But we're not responsible for people in the past or in other boroughs. We have our resources and we're responsible for our residents. There are 3 immediate, straightforward steps Wandsworth could take. Work with landlords to prevent those evictions that cause homelessness. I was speaking to a landlord last week who was saying she wanted to keep her housing benefit tenants in her house, rang up the council, wouldn't reach out, meet her halfway or be any use at all. We can support families through our existing budgets. When the social fund was scrapped, Wandsworth Council was given £930,000 to support families in crisis. It didn't even hand out a quarter of that money and kept the rest. And we can use the Housing Department's deep resources to invest in better temporary accommodation. We have the financial strength to tackle this crisis. Last year, as the homelessness crisis grew, we put £10 million, largely from sales, into housing reserves. So they went well above £200 million. I'll conclude by saying these measures that I've suggested don't have any impact on council tax. Housing money's ring-fenced, so Wandsworth can scale up its response from where it is to the homelessness crisis without costing council taxpayers a penny. In fact, we'll save money in the long run by keeping children in school and parents in work. And I'd urge all members to support this motion, even in its amended state. Thank you.
Thank you. The matter now before the Council is the motion as amended, proposed by Councillor Ellis and seconded by Councillor Jane Cooper. So it's the amendment that is now before the Council and seconded by Councillor Jane Cooper concerning homelessness in the borough. So just to emphasise that, you're voting on the amendment. Those for the amendment, please raise your hands. And those against?
The amendment is 3416. The amendment is carried 3416.
34-16. The amendment is carried 34 to 16.
Now the motion as amended.
Now, the motion itself.
As amended.
The motion as amended.
Can we take that on the same numbers?
Can we take that on the same numbers? Agreed?